Hey guys, I'm Dave at the Trull Gallery, and today we're going to update this old drill press table. I built this drill press table about 10 or 15 years ago, and it probably came from a set of plans from fine woodworking, but it's seen better days. The shop-made T-tracks get filled with chips. When I'm using a small bit, the fence gets in the way of the chuck, and after a while, the insert gets mushroomed out in the bottom and kind of pushes up. Let's see what a few changes in design can do to improve this table and make it easier to work with. I treated myself to some half-inch Baltic birch for this project, and I only wept for a short time as I paid for it. Once back at the shop, I ripped down a strip to 16 inches wide with my circular saw and my Craig rip cut. Then I used my shop-made straight edge guide and cut two pieces off that stock at 27 inches. After laying everything out on SketchUp, I was able to transfer the location of my sacrificial insert. It's a bit off-center, but then so am I. But more on its location later. After drilling a 3/8 inch hole in each corner of the lines I had just laid out, I came back with my jigsaw and cut out the insert area. I kept my cut inside the line so I could clean them up in the next step. I tacked a few strips of scrap ply on the lines I had just drawn, but still double-checked that each piece was square to the others and the right distance away. Two 23-gauge pin nails in each one was enough to do the trick. After flipping the top over, I used a flush trim bit in my palm router and cleaned up all the edges. After popping off the guide strips, I used my pull saw to clean up the corners. You can leave them rounded if you like, you'll just have to round the corners of the insert pieces that'll go in there later. I followed up with a chisel and finally some sandpaper to get my corners as clean as possible. For me, cutting square blanks just seems a lot easier. After marking out the location of the holes I'd just cut on the mating piece, I began by spreading lots of glue on the table half. Once the glue was spread out, I popped in more 23-gauge pins just to hold things from moving around. I did my best to put the pins well inside any cleanup cuts for later. Another piece of ply will help spread the weight of a propane cylinder, and a little glue dance, and this was set aside to dry. I had some scraps of half-inch Baltic birch and cut them to around 25 inches by 5 inches for the face of the fence. After spreading a lot more glue, the two pieces were clamped together and clamped to a level just to keep them straight, and then this was also set aside to dry. Once the glue was dry, it was time to clean up the edges. By securing the two pieces of the table with pins during the glue-up, I was able to keep one face and one edge of the ply flush, which helped with the next few cuts. Enter the first design change. My table saw fence only goes to 25 inches, and my crosscut slit is too narrow for the width of this table. Solution? Make my first crosscut at 25 inches. I could then reset my fence to 24 inches, cut the second edge, and keep my insert where it needed to be for later. Then I reset the fence again and ripped the table first to 16 1/4 inches and then the other side to its final dimension of 16 inches. The fence stock was cut the same way, first ripping one edge at 4 1/4 and then the other at 4. This was later reduced to 3 inches as the second design change. The shorter fence kept it out of the way of the handles on the drill press. I changed out my plywood blade for a 3/4 inch dado set and set the height to just over 3/8 of an inch. This would give me the grooves for the T-track, and I like my track to sit just below the surface. After forgetting to hit record, I faked the two outer cuts here. I got a little tear-out, probably from dull dado blades. Covering the area with blue tape could have prevented this. Another option is to take a shallow initial cut, reset the blade height, and take a full cut. A third option is to sharpen my dado set. The fence was reset to cut a short dado in the center of the table. Just make sure you don't cut past the square that you previously cut out. The last dado was on the fence. This time I set the fence so the dado would be 3/4 of an inch from the top of the fence and ran the dado. To keep my table as large as possible, but still not take up the entire shop, I plan to have it sit past the column of the drill press. I laid out a 4-inch diameter half circle on the center line of the back of the table. I also laid out 2 miters on the front corners, so I'd be less likely to bang into them as I walked by. To ensure the miters were even, I set a stop on my miter saw, set my blade to 45 degrees, and then cut the 2 corners. To cut the half circle, I put a new blade in my jigsaw and cut just shy of the line. Now I would usually clean this up on the drill press, but just for kicks I chucked up a drum sander in my cordless drill and used that to clean up any saw marks. Since my table shrunk from the original design, I took my double thickness fence and cut it to 24 inches long. There's a back ledge to this fence, so I cut it down as well. Now I could cut a matching semicircle in the fence back ledge, so it too could wrap around the drill press post. After fastening the T-track into the fence, I laid out the chuck clearance area, and it was time to cut that out. I think of aluminum as a fairly hard wood, and it can be cut with most woodworking tools. My jigsaw made quick work of the cutout, and I came back with a file to clean up any saw marks. If you've seen any of my shop build videos before, you know I'm going to sand things. I'll be looking at this for years to come, so I want it to look nice. No rough spots, no saw marks, and no burn marks. It'd just drive me nuts. After gluing up some additional half-inch scraps, they got trimmed down to 2 1/4 inches wide. Once that was done, it was back to the miter saw to cut the braces for the fence assembly. After cutting the first 2 pieces at 45 degrees, I almost forgot to reset my fence, and it would have cut off another big chunk of that fence. A quick adjustment, and the other 2 pieces were cut to size. Before assembling anything else, I wanted to put a quarter round on the edges. This could be done with a handheld router, but with the dados already cut, there'd be no place for the bearing to ride. So I set up my table router, and after a couple of test cuts, ran all the pieces that needed their edges eased. And maybe one edge that really didn't, but you didn't see that. Now it's time to assemble the fence. I ran a bead of glue on the back ledge. I held it tight to the face of the fence on a known straight surface, my table saw, and a couple of pin nails held everything in place for now. Then each of the braces got glue on their square sides, were held in place while I checked the fence for square, and put in a few more pins to hold everything together. After wiping off the excess glue, I realized I forgot to check where the outside braces sat. Yep, right in line with the T-track. Luckily I caught it quickly, knocked them off, and reattached them much further out so they wouldn't interfere with the lock knobs later. Once the glue had dried, I could set the fence on the table. Now I could transfer the center line of the dados to the fence and use that to locate the holes for the locking screws. At the drill press, I chucked up a 1/4 inch bit and set the fence to line up with the marks I had just made. After drilling a hole on either end, I replaced the 1/4 inch drill bit with an 11/32 inch drill bit, and that would give me clearance for the 5/16 fasteners I would use to hold the fence to the table. I gave the fence and table a couple of coats of water-based urethane, sanding to 220 grit in between coats. Again, I'll be looking at this for years, so I wanted to give it some protection. Once the finish had dried, it was time to start adding more T-track, this time for the table. Over at the miter saw, I made a few slow cuts to give me the 2 long and 1 short pieces I needed for the tabletop.
A quick touch-up with a file to remove any burrs, and the pieces of the T-track are ready to go. I set each piece of track into its groove and pre-drilled through the holes in the track with a self-centering Bix bit. Then I could secure the track to the top with some number 6 by half-inch screws. And if you're wondering about that short T-track in the center, it'll give me another place to put a clamp if I need to. And while I don't usually clamp my stock to the table very often, sometimes I will for safety issues, mostly when drilling metal. Next it was back to the table saw to rip down some strips of half-inch ply for the table inserts. I cut them so they'd sit snugly but not too tight in the table recess. I took those strips over to the miter saw, set a stop, and cut a pile of inserts. It'll be quite some time before I have to make more, and they're small enough to stash away in my drill press stand. It's time to lose the old table. It was held in place with a couple of 1/4-inch bolts and some threaded inserts and came off easily. Here you can see why I want an add-on table for my drill press. The stock table is really designed for metalworking, and it's pretty small. This one is just under 11 inches in diameter. To set the new table in place, I started by centering it on the drill press table and marking the location of the center of the steel table and the table itself, just in case. I had milled up a couple of scraps of solid maple that would fit nicely into the slots of the table. Now I can add some CA glue, slide the first strip into one of the slots, and tack it in place with some 23 gauge pin nails. I repeated the process on the opposite slot to give me some positive registration locations for the two tables. If need be, I can add some bolts later if the table seems unstable. I flipped the top over and used a 1/2-inch Forstner bit to drill a hole where I had previously marked the center of the steel table. I'd set a piece of scrap in the recess for the inserts to prevent any blowout. This hole will give me an access point to pop out the inserts later with a screwdriver when they wear out. I dug through my bin of jig hardware and came up with a couple of T-bolts and some star knobs. I put the bolts in the track, the fence on the bolts, and then added the star knobs. Now we can easily slide the fence into place and lock it down with these knobs. Next I cut a 3-inch square from another scrap of 1/2-inch ply to use as a stop block. I set it next to the fence to determine the location of the hole for its locking knob. I put an 11/32 bit in the chuck and drilled the first hole with my new table. The third T-bolt I grabbed looked like the others until I tried to put it in the track. I'm not sure where this came from, but the head is too thick to fit in the track. Here you can see the difference between the two bolts. Since I don't have another short bolt on hand, I'll just swap out one of the table bolts with this long one and use the shorter bolt for the stop block. The nice thing is I can easily slide the block from one side of the fence to the other and back again so that I can work from either side of the chuck. One of the problems with a lot of add-on tables is that they can interfere with the crank used to adjust the table height. I thought I'd get lucky since I'd replaced the original handle years ago. Nope! The new handle was still just a bit too high. And rather than cut out a chunk of my new tabletop, I cut out a relief on the underside to give the handle room to rotate. I started with a 1/2-inch bit in my router and hogged out most of the waste. I made several passes to get to the final depth of 3/4 of an inch, staying inside my layout lines, yet still removing as much of the stock as possible. Now, I know it's never going to be seen, but I had to clean it up. Again, I tacked some scrap as a straight edge along the layout lines, and this time I used a bearing-guided trim bit to clean up the edges. I made the first 2 passes, then removed the straight edges and ran the bearing along the sides I'd just cut for the last couple of passes. That left me with a nice clean area that I'll never see and allow me to adjust my table height without banging my knuckles. After setting the table back on the drill press, I made sure I could adjust the height without any interference. Then I could put the fence back on, and now I'm ready to use my new fancy table.
The two biggest things that bothered me with my old table were the T-track that kept getting clogged and the fence that interfered with the chuck. I think this new design will help out a lot. I also like the fact that I now have a stop block that I can use without having to add a clamp to it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. Is there something I could have done differently, better, smarter while making this table? Drop in the comments below. Let me know. Love to hear. And if you enjoyed this video, maybe give us a thumbs up and share it with friends. And if you haven't already, maybe hit that subscribe button and the little bell so you get notified each time I put out a new video. I'm not sure what's coming up next, but then again, I rarely do. So you just have to stand by and see. Guys, have a great day. Stay safe. We'll see you soon.